"Come with me," said the lonely mafia boss to the woman beaten for being fat. It all starts in a dark parking lot where a gentle woman is being attacked by the people who were supposed to love her. But out of the shadows steps a man everyone fears, a mafia boss who could end lives with a whisper. Instead of walking away, he lifts her into his car and tells her the words that change everything. "Come with me." But when she wakes up in his hidden mountain fortress, nothing makes sense. Why is the most dangerous man in the city treating her like she's the only person he can't lose? And why are rival gangs suddenly hunting her, someone who's never hurt anyone? She soon learns he didn't just save her. He marked her, protected her, claimed her. But there's a secret buried in his house, one that could destroy them both if she uncovers it. Did he rescue her to keep her safe, or to keep her forever? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow across the private dining room of La Maison, but their sparkle did nothing to ease the knot in Karina's stomach. She smoothed her black cocktail dress over her curves for the 100th time, trying to make herself smaller under the sharp stares of Mark's family. The engagement dinner, that should have been a celebration, felt more like an execution. "Dear, perhaps you should skip the bread basket," Mark's mother stage whispered from across the white tablecloth, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she reached for her wineglass. "That dress is already working overtime." Karina's cheeks burned as she set down the piece of bread she'd barely touched. Next to her, Mark became intensely interested in his phone, his silence speaking volumes. She glanced at her engagement ring, a modest diamond that had seemed romantic 6 months ago, but now felt like a shackle. "Hey, careful, Mom," Jake Ellison, Mark's older brother, smirked. "If she gets any hungrier, she might eat the centerpiece next." His younger brother, Tom, snorted into his whiskey, and they shared a look that made Karina's skin crawl. She'd dealt with their cruelty before, but tonight it had a sharper edge. Their expensive suits couldn't hide the meanness in their eyes. The main course arrived, perfectly plated salmon that Karina could barely taste through her anxiety. She focused on taking small, careful bites while conversation swirled around her like poison gas. Every time she looked up, she caught another smirk, another whispered comment behind manicured hands. "At least the photographer will have plenty of wide-angle lenses for the wedding photos," Tom muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Karina's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. "Mark," she whispered, "maybe we should go." But Mark was already rising from his chair. "I need to take this." "Call," he announced, walking away without meeting her eyes. He'd been doing that more lately, leaving her to fend for herself against his family's barbs. The dessert course arrived in a blur of chocolate and cruel comments. As the plates were being cleared, Jake leaned across the table. "Hey, Karina, Tom and I want to talk to you outside for a minute, about the wedding." Warning bells rang in her head. But what choice did she have? Mark was still conspicuously absent, and refusing would only make things worse. She gathered her purse with shaking hands and followed the brothers through the restaurant's main dining room, past tables of elegant diners who didn't notice her distress. The night air hit her face as they stepped into the parking lot. Before she could react, rough hands grabbed her arms and slammed her against the brick wall beside the service entrance. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. "You're embarrassing our family," Jake snarled, his perfectly styled hair falling across his forehead as he leaned in close. His cologne couldn't mask the whiskey on his breath. "Mark's too soft to say it, but you need to understand your place." "Please," Karina gasped. "You're hurting me." The slap caught her across the face, snapping her head to the side. Tom's laughter echoed in the darkness. "Shut up," Jake hissed. "You think you deserve my brother? Look at you." Tears blurred her vision as she struggled against their grip. The rough brick scraped her bare arms, and she could taste blood where her lip had split. All those years of letting their verbal abuse slide, and now it had turned physical. She'd been so stupid to think she could ever be part of their world. The low purr of an engine cut through the night. Through her tears, Karina saw a black SUV roll to a stop, its tinted windows reflecting the dim parking lot lights. The brothers didn't seem to notice, too focused on their cruelty. The driver's door opened silently, and a man unfolded himself from the vehicle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an impeccable black suit that seemed to absorb the darkness around him. His features were sharp, aristocratic, but it was his eyes that made Karina's breath catch, cold and calculating as they took in the scene. He didn't rush. Each step was measured, deliberate as he approached. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with lethal authority. "Release her." Jake turned, irritation flashing across his face. Mind your own business, pal. This is a family matter. The stranger's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in those dark eyes. I won't repeat myself. Tom released Karina's arm to face the newcomer. Do you know who we are? Our father. The movement was too fast to follow. One moment Tom was posturing, the next he was on his knees, gasping as the stranger's hand found precise pressure points in his shoulder and neck. Jake launched himself forward with a curse, but the stranger sidestepped smoothly, caught his arm, and used Jake's own momentum to slam him face first into the wall. Both brothers lay groaning on the pavement, their expensive suits covered in dirt and blood. The stranger hadn't even broken a sweat. Karina's legs gave out, and she started to slide down the wall. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. The stranger lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. She caught the scent of sandalwood and leather, felt the solid warmth of him through his suit jacket. Where are you taking me? She whispered, her voice breaking on a sob. He carried her to the waiting SUV, his stride smooth and unhurried. There was something both terrifying and comforting about the way he held her, like she was precious cargo he would protect at all costs. This close, she could see the tiny scar above his right eyebrow, the way his jaw clenched as he looked down at her tear-stained face. Behind them, Jake managed to push himself to his knees. You don't know what you're doing, he spat, blood dripping from his nose. When our father hears about this. When your father hears the name Lorenzo Vitale, the stranger cut in, his voice arctic, he will understand exactly what I'm doing. He opened the SUV's passenger door with one hand, still holding Karina securely. And he will thank whatever God he believes in that I didn't decide to teach his sons a more permanent lesson about how to treat women. The name Vitale sparked something in Karina's memory. Whispered conversations, newspaper headlines she'd glimpsed at the library where she worked. But her thoughts were too scattered by fear and adrenaline to piece it together. Lorenzo settled her gently in the passenger seat, careful not to jostle her injuries. When he reached across to fasten her seatbelt, she caught another glimpse of his face. There was something different in his expression now, a softness around his eyes that hadn't been there when he was dealing with the brothers. Please, she whispered again. But she wasn't sure if she was begging him to let her go or take her far away from this nightmare. He straightened, studying her face for a long moment. You're safe now, he said quietly, and somehow she believed him despite everything her rational mind was screaming. No one will hurt you again! The door closed with a soft click, and Karina watched through the window as Lorenzo walked around to the driver's side. Her entire body was shaking, shock setting in as the adrenaline began to fade. The split in her lips stung, and she could feel bruises forming where the brothers had grabbed her. In the rearview mirror, she could see Jake and Tom staggering to their feet, supporting each other as they limped toward the restaurant. She thought of Mark, probably still inside on his conveniently timed phone call, and felt something inside her finally break free. Whatever happened next, she couldn't go back to that life of constant belittlement and carefully crafted cruelty. Lorenzo slid behind the wheel, his movements precise and controlled. The engine hummed to life, and the leather seats began to warm beneath her. He turned to look at her, and in the dim light, his eyes seemed to hold entire galaxies of unspoken promises. Where are you taking me? Karina asked again, her voice stronger this time despite her trembling hands. The SUV's engine purred as it carved through the night, each turn on the winding road making Karina's head throb harder. Her torn dress clung uncomfortably to her skin, and she could taste copper where her lip had split. In the rearview mirror, the city lights grew smaller until they were just a distant glow against the dark sky. Breathe, Lorenzo instructed quietly, his deep voice breaking through her spiraling thoughts. In through your nose, out through your mouth, focus on my voice. Karina realized she'd been taking shallow, panicked breaths. She forced herself to follow his instructions, though her hand still trembled in her lap. Where are we going? I need to... You're safe with me now, Lorenzo cut in, his tone gentle but leaving no room for argument. His hands were steady on the steering wheel, navigating the mountain curves with practiced ease. That's all you need to know right now. The elevation climbed steadily, making Karina's ears pop. Moonlight filtered through the trees, casting strange shadows across the road. She watched Lorenzo's profile, trying to reconcile the deadly grace she'd witnessed in the parking lot with the careful way he'd lifted her into the car. My phone, she said suddenly, patting her pockets. I need to call someone, let them know. Your phone is still in your purse, which you left at the restaurant, Lorenzo replied. It's better this way, safer. Karina wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. Safer from what? From whom? You can't just kidnap someone and claim it's for their own good. Lorenzo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I didn't kidnap you, Karina. I removed you from an immediate threat. There's a difference. She's startled at the use of her name. How do you know who I am? Before he could answer, the SUV rounded a bend and approached a massive iron gate set into a stone wall. Floodlights illuminated the perimeter, and Karina caught glimpses of security cameras tracking their movement. Men in tactical gear emerged from a guardhouse, their weapons visible but lowered as they recognized the vehicle. The gate swung open silently, revealing a long driveway that wound up through manicured grounds. At the top of the hill stood an enormous house. No, estate was a better word. Modern architecture blended seamlessly with classic stone, creating an impression of both luxury and fortification. More armed men stood at attention as Lorenzo pulled up to the front entrance. One opened Karina's door, keeping his eyes respectfully averted as she struggled to step out on shaking legs. Lorenzo was beside her in an instant, his hand at her elbow providing steady support. This way, he murmured, guiding her through heavy wooden doors into a warmly lit foyer. The interior was a study in understated wealth, hardwood floors, abstract art, and furniture that probably cost more than her yearly salary. They climbed a curved staircase to the second floor, where Lorenzo led her down a hallway to a guest suite. The room was larger than her entire apartment, with a sitting area, king-size bed, and floor-to-ceiling windows that would probably offer spectacular mountain views in daylight. The bathroom is through there, Lorenzo indicated a door. You'll find everything you need, first aid supplies, toiletries, clean clothes. Try to rest. Karina wrapped her arms tighter around herself. I need to call my friend Emma. She'll be worried when she can't reach me. No phone calls, Lorenzo said, his voice firm but not unkind. Mark's family has connections. They could trace the call, find out where you are. Until I'm certain of their next move, we need to be careful. A knock at the door made Karina jump. A woman in a crisp uniform entered carrying a tray with water, tea, and what looked like pain medication. She set it on the bedside table with a small bow before leaving. Take the pills, Lorenzo advised. They'll help with the headache and bruising. He moved to leave but paused in the doorway. There are guards stationed in the hallway. If you need anything, just ask. Try to sleep, Karina. You're safe here. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Karina alone in the luxurious prison. She sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the surreal turn her evening had taken. The pills and water beckoned, and after a moment's hesitation, she took them. Her whole body ached from the brothers' rough handling. In the bathroom, she found designer toiletries and soft cotton pajamas that somehow fit her curvy frame perfectly. The first aid kit contained everything she needed to clean her split lip and apply arnica gel to the bruises blooming on her arms. Exhaustion hit her like a wave as she climbed into the cloud-soft bed. Despite her fear and confusion, her body was demanding rest. She drifted off to the distant sound of waves from a white noise machine, wondering if she'd wake up to find this had all been a strange dream. Sometime later, minutes or hours she couldn't tell, voices in the hallway pulled her partially from sleep. She recognized Lorenzo's low timbre, though he was speaking too quietly for her to make out most of the words. Under my protection now, she heard him say firmly. Make sure everyone understands. No one touches her. There was a pause as whoever was on the phone responded. I don't care about protocol. She stays. Footsteps paced back and forth outside her door as the conversation continued in muted tones. Karina lay still, her heart pounding, as the reality of her situation truly sank in. This powerful, dangerous man had saved her from immediate harm, only to bring her into his own carefully controlled world. The pacing continued long after the phone call ended, like a predator guarding its territory. Karina stared into the darkness, trying to process the dizzying series of events that had led her here. Lorenzo Vitale was clearly more than just a wealthy businessman. The armed guards, the fortress-like estate, the way Mark's brothers had blanched at his name. She was safe from her former fiancé's family, yes. But as she listened to Lorenzo's measured footsteps in the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd traded one cage for another. Her rescuer and her captor were one and the same, and she had no idea what price she would ultimately pay for his protection. The white noise machine continued its steady rhythm, but sleep remained elusive. Every time Karina closed her eyes, she saw Lorenzo's face, the cold fury when he'd confronted her attackers, the unexpected gentleness when he'd carried her to safety. He was a contradiction, wrapped in an enigma, and she was now completely at his mercy. The mountain air was cool against her face from a slightly open window, carrying the scent of pine and night-blooming jasmine. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the distinct sound of men changing guard shifts. The estate operated like a military compound, disguised as a luxury retreat, and she was now its most closely guarded guest, or prisoner. The line between the two seemed dangerously thin in this gilded cage. Lorenzo's footsteps finally faded around 3 o'clock in the morning, but Karina knew the hallway wasn't truly empty. She could sense the alert presence of the guards, feel the weight of invisible eyes, ensuring both her safety and her containment. Whatever came next, one thing was devastatingly clear. Her life as she knew it had ended in that restaurant parking lot. She curled onto her side, pulling the silken comforter tighter around her shoulders. The bed was the most comfortable she'd ever slept in, the room more luxurious than any she'd seen outside of magazines. Yet as dawn began to paint the sky in pale streaks of pink and gold, Karina remained awake, caught between gratitude and fear, salvation and capture, the devil she knew and the one she didn't. Sunlight streamed through gauzy curtains, painting golden patterns across unfamiliar silk sheets. Karina blinked slowly, her mind foggy as she took in the luxurious guest room. For one blissful moment, she couldn't remember how she got here. Then reality crashed back. Mark's brothers attacking her, Lorenzo's intervention, the midnight drive to this mountain fortress. Her body ached as she pushed herself up, bruises from last night making themselves known. The designer pajamas felt soft against her skin, a strange contrast to the uncertainty churning in her stomach. After freshening up in the marble bathroom, she found a fluffy robe hanging on the door and wrapped it around herself, like armor. The house was quiet as she ventured downstairs, following the rich scent of coffee. Her bare feet padded silently across polished hardwood floors until she reached a gleaming chef's kitchen. Lorenzo stood at a commercial espresso machine, his broad shoulders wrapped in a tailored shirt that did nothing to hide his muscular frame. He turned at her approach, dark eyes assessing her with that same unreadable expression from last night. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and smooth. "Sit. You need to eat." A plate appeared before her, fresh croissants, eggs, fruit arranged with military precision. An espresso followed, the china delicate in his large hands. Karina perched uncertainly on a bar stool, watching as he resumed his position, leaning against the counter. "Why am I here?" she finally asked, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Mark's family has connections," Lorenzo replied, taking a measured sip of his own coffee. "They might retaliate if you report the assault. Here, you're protected." "I want to leave," Karina said firmly, though her hands trembled around her cup. "I appreciate your help last night, but I can take care of myself." A ghost of a smile touched Lorenzo's lips. "You misunderstand. This isn't a suggestion." He set down his cup with a soft clink. "Come with me. There's something you need to see." He led her through the house, each room more impressive than the last, until they reached a heavy wooden door. Lorenzo produced a key from his pocket, the lock clicking open with ominous finality. The wing beyond felt different, older, filled with shadow and secrets. "This," Lorenzo gestured to the sprawling room before them, "is why I really brought you here." Karina's librarian's heart skipped despite her fear. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls, crammed with leather-bound ledgers and dusty boxes. Filing cabinets stood in neat rows, their metal facades bearing numeric codes. A large desk dominated one corner, surrounded by stacks of papers and encrypted USB drives. "I need an archivist," Lorenzo continued, watching her reaction carefully. "Someone intelligent, detail-oriented, someone I can trust to organize and digitize these records." "No," Karina said immediately, taking a step back. "I won't work for you. I don't even know who you are." Lorenzo moved to one of the filing cabinets, retrieving a thick manila folder. "You should understand exactly what you're refusing." He laid the file open on the desk. Karina's eyes widened as she took in the contents: surveillance photos, bank statements, transcribed phone calls, evidence of political bribes, strategic alliances between crime families, coded orders for hits. Her hands shook as she processed the implications of what she was seeing. "This is just the surface," Lorenzo said quietly. "Decades of secrets. My father's empire was built on lies and betrayal. I need to understand the full scope of what he created." Karina stepped away from the desk, her breath coming faster. "You're showing me this to trap me here. Now I know too much to leave." "You're already involved, whether you want to be or not," Lorenzo confirmed, his expression grave. "Mark's family answers to people who would kill to keep these secrets buried. The only way forward is through." Karina's legs felt weak as she sank into a nearby chair, surrounded by towering stacks of records. The magnitude of her situation crashed over her in waves. She wasn't just hiding from her ex-fiancé's family anymore. She had stumbled into something far darker and more dangerous. And Lorenzo. He wasn't simply her rescuer or captor, but something far more complicated. Her fingers traced the edge of a leather ledger, professional instincts warring with self-preservation. The archivist in her itched to dive into these mysteries, to bring order to chaos. The practical part of her screamed that this way lay madness, or worse. "How long?" she whispered. "As long as it takes," Lorenzo replied. He remained standing, a dark sentinel among the shadows of the archive. "You'll be comfortable here, protected, well compensated." Protected, but not free. The weight of unseen eyes pressed in around her, reminding her of the armed guards patrolling the grounds. She thought of her small apartment, her job at the library, the quiet life she'd built for herself. All of it felt like a distant dream now. "What if I still refuse?" Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Then you'll stay as my guest until I'm certain you won't be targeted. But I think we both know you're too curious to walk away from this puzzle." He wasn't wrong. Even now, her gaze kept drifting to the mysterious ledgers, wondering what secrets lay within their pages. Her mind was already categorizing, creating potential organizational systems, imagining how to cross-reference the physical and digital records. "I need time to think," she managed. Lorenzo nodded once. "Take today to rest and consider your options. We'll discuss terms tomorrow." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, Karina. Don't try to contact anyone outside these walls, for their safety as well as yours." The heavy door closed behind him with a decisive click. Karina remained in the chair, trembling slightly as she surveyed the archive around her. Each box and file represented another thread in a web she was now hopelessly tangled in. The morning sun slanted through high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like secrets in the air. She thought of the kind elderly couple who ran the coffee shop near her apartment, of her coworkers at the library, her sister in Seattle. Would they worry when she didn't show up? Would they look for her? Or would Lorenzo's influence ensure that her disappearance raised no alarms? The magnitude of these questions overwhelmed her. Karina buried her face in her hands, trying to steady her breathing. When she looked up again, her gaze fell on the open file still lying on the desk. The evidence of corruption and violence seemed to mock her, reminding her that the simple act of seeing these documents had sealed her fate. Her new reality had already begun, whether she was ready or not. The only choice now was how she would face it, as a willing participant or an unwilling prisoner. Neither option offered the freedom she craved, but at least one path might give her purpose. And perhaps, if she was clever enough, a way to eventually regain control of her own destiny. For now, though, she could only sit among the dusty records, feeling the weight of untold secrets pressing in around her. Somewhere above, Lorenzo's footsteps echoed through the house. Her protector, her jailer, and now her employer, whether she agreed or not. The morning light continued to filter through the windows, but it brought no clarity to her troubled thoughts. Karina stared at the contract Lorenzo had placed before her, its crisp pages stark against the old wooden desk. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up, scanning the formal language that would bind her to this strange new life. "I need to be clear about something," she said, forcing herself to meet Lorenzo's intense gaze. "I'm accepting this position because you've made it obvious I don't have much choice, but I want everything in writing: salary, accommodations, expectations, and most importantly, my eventual freedom." Lorenzo's expression remained neutral, but something like respect flickered in his dark eyes. "Of course, I honor my contracts, Karina. You'll find everything clearly detailed, including provisions for your safety and comfort." She read through each page carefully, her librarian's attention to detail serving her well. The terms were surprisingly generous: a salary that made her eyes widen, private quarters, health care, and even a clause about eventual reassessment of her security situation. Everything was spelled out in precise legal language. "You prepared this quickly," she observed, noting the date. "I'm efficient." Lorenzo handed her an expensive pen. "And I keep my word." Karina signed her name with deliberate strokes, watching as Lorenzo added his own signature below hers. The sight of their names together on the document sent an odd shiver through her. "Where would you like to begin?" Lorenzo gestured to the sprawling archive room. Karina surveyed the chaos around her, boxes stacked haphazardly, filing cabinets overflowing, USB drives scattered across surfaces. Her organizational instincts kicked in, despite her reservations. First, I need to create broad categories, she said, already moving toward the nearest stack. Financial records, correspondence, digital media, photographs. Everything needs to be sorted before I can start proper cataloging. She lost herself in the work, grateful for the familiar routine of organization. Box by box, she created preliminary piles, her mind automatically building classification. Systems. The task helped quiet her racing thoughts about her situation. Throughout the day, she felt Lorenzo's presence. He would appear silently in the doorway, watching her methodical progress with those unnervingly intense eyes. Sometimes he stayed for minutes, sometimes longer, but he never interrupted her work. His quiet observation should have made her nervous, but instead, she found herself stealing glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking. The way he stood, perfectly still, perfectly controlled, reminded her that this man was dangerous. Yet he had shown her nothing but careful courtesy since bringing her here. The contradiction fascinated her even as it unnerved her. By evening, her back ached from lifting boxes, but she had made significant progress. Basic categories were established, and she had even begun a rough inventory system on her laptop. You should rest, Lorenzo's voice came from the doorway, making her jump slightly. Have dinner. Karina straightened, wincing at her stiff muscles. I need to know more about what happens next, she said, seizing the moment to press for answers. How long will I be here? What exactly are you protecting me from? Lorenzo stepped into the room, his presence immediately filling the space. You'll stay until I'm certain no one is hunting you. I won't risk your safety by rushing that assessment. But you won't hurt me. She hated how small her voice sounded. Something softened in his expression. No, Karina. I won't harm you. You're under my protection now. The way he said it, like an unbreakable vow, made her shiver again. After a quiet dinner alone in her room, Karina found herself restless. The house felt enormous and strange in the darkness. She decided to walk the hallway, hoping to tire herself enough to sleep. As she passed Lorenzo's study, she heard voices, his and another man's, both speaking in low, tense tones. She knew she should keep walking, but something made her pause. The Bratva is already asking questions, the unknown voice said. They want to know about the woman you stole. I didn't steal her, Lorenzo's voice was cold. I protected her from abuse. The Bratva has no claim here. They're saying you've broken protocol by taking her without consultation. They're demanding. They demand nothing from me, Lorenzo cut in, his tone deadly quiet. She stays under my protection. End of discussion. Karina stood frozen in the hallway, her heart pounding. The Bratva. She knew enough about organized crime to recognize that name. Russian Mafia. The realization that such dangerous people were already asking about her made her blood run cold. She backed away from the door silently, her mind spinning. She wasn't just hiding from her ex-fiancé's family anymore. She had become a piece in a much larger, more dangerous game. And somehow, Lorenzo Vitale, this mysterious, dangerous man, was the only thing standing between her and forces she could barely comprehend. When she finally made it back to her room, Karina sat on the edge of her bed, staring out the window at the dark mountains beyond. The estate's security lights created pools of brightness in the darkness, and she could see armed men patrolling the grounds. Were they protecting her or ensuring she couldn't escape? She thought about the contract she'd signed, the work she'd begun in the archive, the way Lorenzo watched her with those intense eyes. Everything had seemed almost normal during the day, just a job, just organization and cataloging. But now, in the darkness, reality crashed back in. She was trapped in a world of powerful men and dangerous secrets, and there was no easy way out. Her hands shook as she pulled the blankets around herself. The conversation she'd overheard played on repeat in her mind. The Bratva was asking about her. They called her the woman Lorenzo stole. What did that mean for her safety? What did it mean for her future? Outside, the security lights continued their steady illumination, and somewhere in the house, Lorenzo was dealing with threats she could barely imagine. Karina lay awake for a long time, wondering if she would ever feel truly safe again, or if this new reality would forever be marked by danger and uncertainty. The moon cast long shadows through her window, and in the distance, she heard the sound of more vehicles arriving at the estate. More guards, perhaps, or more people involved in this world she'd stumbled into. She pulled the blankets tighter, trying to find comfort in the luxury of her surroundings, in Lorenzo's promise of protection. But sleep remained elusive as her mind raced with questions. Who exactly was Lorenzo Vitale? What was in all those records she was now responsible for organizing? And most importantly, what would the Bratva do next? The night stretched on, filled with the soft sounds of movement throughout the house. and the weight of secrets pressing in around her. Sunrise painted the mountains gold as Karina stood at her window, watching guards patrol the grounds below. After a night of fitful sleep, she'd made up her mind, if she couldn't leave, she would at least negotiate for some basic freedoms. She found Lorenzo in his study, already impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit despite the early hour. He looked up from his laptop, those dark eyes assessing her. "I need to go outside," she said firmly, proud that her voice didn't waver. "I'm not asking to leave the property, but I can't stay locked inside indefinitely." Lorenzo studied her for a long moment. "The courtyard," he finally said, "with guards present, 1 hour each morning and evening." She hadn't expected him to agree so easily. "Thank you." He nodded once, then gestured to a fresh stack of boxes. "These need your attention today. They're sensitive." The archives room had become familiar territory over the past days. Karina settled at her desk, pulling on cotton gloves to protect the documents. The first box contained letters dating back 30 years, many in code. Her librarian's training kicked in as she began sorting them chronologically. By mid-morning, patterns emerged in the correspondence, names of judges, politicians, business leaders, all tied to massive financial transactions and carefully worded threats. She discovered electronic records, too, encrypted USB drives and disks containing what appeared to be blackmail material spanning decades. The scale of it made her hands shake. This wasn't just organized crime. This was systematic corruption at the highest levels. Every document she touched could probably destroy dozens of powerful careers. "Finding what you need?" Lorenzo's quiet voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway, watching her with that unnervingly steady gaze. "I'm starting to understand the scope," she said carefully. "These records, they implicate a lot of important people." "Yes." He moved into the room, examining her careful organizational system. "You're doing well with them." The praise, though simple, warmed her unexpectedly. She turned back to her work, aware of his continued presence but trying to focus. Evening arrived sooner than she expected. To her surprise, Lorenzo appeared with dinner for both of them, simple pasta and wine served at her desk. "You should eat," he said, pulling up a chair. "You've been working for hours." The domesticity of sharing a meal with him felt strange after days of eating alone in her room. She twirled pasta on her fork, sneaking glances at him. In the soft lamplight, his harsh features seemed less severe. "Tell me about your work at the library," he said suddenly. The request caught her off guard. I've been there 5 years. I specialize in rare books and archival preservation." "You enjoy it?" "I do. Or did." She took a sip of wine. "It was quiet, peaceful, sometimes lonely, but safe," he finished for her. She nodded. "Unlike this. Yet you're good at this too. Better than I expected." "Because I'm careful with secrets," she said. "I always have been." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes. "Were you lonely before? With your fiancé?" The question hit closer to home than she'd expected. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "But I told myself that was normal, that I was lucky anyone wanted me at all." Anger flashed across Lorenzo's face. "They made you believe that about yourself!" She looked down at her plate, unable to hold his intense gaze. "Maybe I already believed it." They finished eating in contemplative silence. After Lorenzo left with the dishes, Karina felt restless. The conversation had stirred up too many feelings she'd been trying to ignore. Without really planning it, she found herself walking toward the estate's main gates. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine trees. She knew guards were watching, but no one stopped her as she approached the heavy iron barrier between her and freedom. "Testing the boundaries," Lorenzo's voice came from behind her. She didn't turn around. "Maybe. Would you stop me?" "I wouldn't have to." He moved to stand beside her. "The minute you leave these gates, you become a target. The Bratva, rival families, even law enforcement, they all know you're here now. They'll assume you know too much." "So I'm trapped here forever?" "Not forever." His voice was gentle. "But for now, yes. Leaving would get you killed." Karina wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in the mountain air. The gates loomed before her, solid and immovable. Beyond them, she could see the winding road disappearing into darkness. "There's no way out, is there?" she whispered. Lorenzo stepped closer, his presence both threatening and oddly comforting. "Not yet." The words settled over her like a heavy blanket. She stayed there for several minutes, feeling the cold air on her face, watching the guards patrol in their precise patterns. Lorenzo remained beside her, silent but watchful. Finally, she turned away from the gates. The mansion's lights glowed warmly in the distance, and she could see her archive room's window illuminated among them. The sight reminded her of all the secrets waiting in those boxes, all the power and danger contained in those documents she now knew too much about. As they walked back toward the house, Karina was acutely aware of Lorenzo matching his pace to hers. He moved with lethal grace, like a predator restraining itself. Yet she felt safer with him near. The realization was uncomfortable but undeniable. Guards nodded respectfully as they passed. The contrast between their heavily armed presence and the estate's elegant architecture struck her anew. Everything about this place was a study in contradictions, beauty and danger, luxury and violence, captivity and protection. Inside, the house was quiet except for their footsteps on marble floors. Lorenzo walked her to the archive room, where her carefully organized piles waited exactly as she'd left them. The familiar sight of her workspace offered an odd comfort now. "Rest," Lorenzo said. "Tomorrow will bring new challenges." She watched him walk away, his tall figure casting long shadows in the hallway. Then she turned back to her desk, running her fingers over the folders she'd sorted earlier. These documents were both her prison and her purpose now. Understanding them might be her only path forward. The moon cast silver light through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Somewhere in the mountains, wolves howled, a sound both beautiful and threatening, much like everything else in this new world she'd been drawn into. The next morning, Karina stood in the archive room's doorway, surveying the mountain of work ahead. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dancing dust particles above the stacked boxes. If she was going to be trapped here, she might as well make the most of it. She had just settled at her desk when Lorenzo appeared with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "I noticed you prefer it with cream," he said, placing one beside her. "Thank you." The gesture surprised her. She hadn't expected him to pay attention to such details. He nodded and left without another word, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Karina sipped the perfectly prepared coffee and began sorting through a new set of files. Hours passed as she immersed herself in the work. The methodical nature of organizing helped calm her racing thoughts. She created neat piles, marking folders with colored tabs until she reached a shelf too high to access. After several frustrated attempts to reach it herself, she heard a low chuckle behind her. Lorenzo stood in the doorway watching her struggle. "Need help?" he asked, already moving toward her. "I was managing fine," she protested, but he was already behind her. His hands settled on her waist, surprising her with their warmth. Before she could process the contact, he lifted her effortlessly, as if she weighed nothing. Karina's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she was acutely aware of his strength, the gentle firmness of his grip, and how close their bodies were. "Which box?" His voice was low near her ear. She pointed to a dusty container in the corner, trying to ignore how his touch sent tingles through her body. He held her steady as she retrieved it, then lowered her slowly to the ground. The movement felt almost like an embrace. "I'll get you a proper ladder," he said, stepping back quickly. Karina nodded, unable to form words as she clutched the box to her chest. Her skin still tingled where his hands had been. Later that afternoon, while juggling too many files at once, a heavy box slipped from her grasp. Before it could crash to the floor, Lorenzo materialized beside her with impossible speed. He caught the box with one arm while steadying her with the other, pulling her against his chest in the process. Documents fluttered around them like falling leaves. Karina found herself staring up into his face, noticing for the first time the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. His arm remained around her waist, protective and secure. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "Yes," she whispered, very aware of how close they were standing. "I'm sorry about the mess." "Documents can be reorganized." His thumb moved slightly against her waist. "You cannot be replaced." The intensity in his voice made her stomach flutter. They stayed frozen for a moment before Lorenzo released her and began gathering the scattered papers. As they worked together to collect the documents, their hands brushed repeatedly. Each accidental touch sent electricity through Karina's fingers. When Lorenzo passed her a folder, their fingers connected for a fraction too long. She saw his jaw tighten as he pulled away. By evening, Karina had created an elaborate organizational system covering one wall. Colored strings connected different categories, forming a complex web of relationships between documents. "This looks like a conspiracy theorist's dream," Lorenzo commented as they stood back to examine it over dinner. He'd brought their meals to the archive room, clearing space on a side table. "It's perfectly logical," Karina defended, but found herself smiling at his teasing tone. Ah, yes, because red string connecting offshore accounts to missing shipments is completely normal. A laugh escaped before she could stop it. The sound seemed to startle them both. Lorenzo's eyes widened slightly, and his usual mask of control slipped. For a brief moment, he looked younger, almost boyish in his surprise at their shared moment of levity. The way he was looking at her made her chest tight. She'd never seen him so unguarded, so genuine. It transformed his entire face, softening the hard lines and revealing something vulnerable beneath his dangerous exterior. But the moment passed quickly. Lorenzo's expression settled back into its usual careful neutrality, though his eyes remained warmer than before. They finished eating in comfortable silence. Karina continued working as darkness fell, aware of Lorenzo's presence as he moved around the room. Several times she caught him watching her with an unreadable expression that made her pulse quicken. Finally, during one such moment, their eyes met and held. The intensity in his gaze was overwhelming, desire mixed with something deeper, more conflicted. Heat rushed to Karina's face. She gathered her papers with trembling hands and mumbled a hasty goodnight. She practically ran to her room, her heart pounding. Behind her closed door, she pressed her hands to her burning cheeks, trying to calm her racing pulse. The way he'd looked at her, it was more than just protection or obligation. There had been hunger in his eyes, carefully restrained but unmistakable. Through the heavy wood door, she heard footsteps approach and stop. Lorenzo's presence was unmistakable. She could feel it like an electrical charge in the air. His breathing was heavy, uneven. The handle moved slightly, as if he'd reached for it but stopped himself. Karina held her breath, both hoping and fearing he would enter. Seconds stretched into minutes as Lorenzo remained outside, clearly wrestling with himself. Finally, his footsteps retreated down the hall, but the tension in the air lingered. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands pressed to her thundering heart. The day's moments of contact replayed in her mind, his hands on her waist, his arm around her, the brush of his fingers, that intense gaze. Each memory sent fresh waves of warmth through her body. What was happening between them? He was her captor, her protector, her employer. But today had revealed something else, something that both thrilled and terrified her. The way he'd looked at her suggested he felt it too, this dangerous attraction neither of them had anticipated. Karina changed into her nightgown with shaking hands, hyper-aware that Lorenzo was somewhere in this house, probably as unsettled as she was. The memory of his restrained breathing outside her door made her shiver. He'd wanted to come in, she was certain of it, but his iron control had won out. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing sleep would be impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lorenzo's face, felt his hands, heard his quiet laugh. The man who had seemed so coldly dangerous was becoming something else entirely, and that might be the most dangerous thing of all. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through pine trees. Somewhere in the vast house, she knew Lorenzo was awake too, fighting the same battle between duty and desire. The space between them crackled with possibility, with unspoken words and uncrossed lines. Tomorrow they would return to their careful dance of professionalism, but something had shifted. They could pretend the moments hadn't happened, that the tension wasn't building, but they couldn't unfeel what they'd felt or unsee what they'd glimpsed in each other's eyes. Karina pulled the blankets tighter around herself, but she couldn't escape the memory of Lorenzo's touch or the way he'd looked at her, like she was precious and dangerous all at once, like she was something he both craved and feared. Sleep remained elusive as the night stretched on, filled with thoughts of dark eyes and gentle hands, and all the things left unsaid between them. Thunder rolled across the mountains like a warning, dark clouds gathering over the estate as morning broke. Karina watched from the archive room window as the storm approached, turning the usual pristine view into something ominous and wild. The wind picked up, making the old house creak and moan. "Looks like we're in for a big one," Lorenzo's security chief announced as he passed by. "Boss wants everyone to stay inside today. Storm's supposed to be rough." Karina nodded, secretly grateful for the excuse to dive deeper into her work. After last night's charged moment, she needed the distraction. She returned to the latest stack of boxes she'd been sorting, trying to ignore how her skin still tingled when she remembered Lorenzo's presence outside her door. Mid-morning, while organizing a shelf of older records, she noticed a sealed box shoved far back in a corner. It was different from the others, smaller, covered in dust, with careful handwriting that read, "Maria Vitale, personal." Lorenzo's mother's name made Karina pause. She'd never heard him mention his mother before. She shouldn't open it. The box was sealed for a reason. But as thunder crashed outside and rain lashed against the windows, curiosity won out. Carefully, she broke the seal and lifted the lid. Inside, she found a collection of leather-bound ledgers and bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon. The paper was old, but well-preserved, filled with elegant handwriting. As Karina began to read, her heart started to pound. The letters revealed a horrifying truth. Lorenzo's father had orchestrated the hit that killed Lorenzo's beloved sister 20 years ago. He'd then deliberately blamed a rival family, igniting a brutal war that had ultimately placed Lorenzo at the head of the empire. The evidence was irrefutable. Dates, names, specific details that could only have come from someone on the inside. Karina's hands shook as she read letter after letter. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. Lorenzo's mother had discovered the truth but died before she could reveal it, leaving these records hidden away. All these years, Lorenzo had been carrying the weight of an empire built on his father's lies, believing his sister's killers were still out there. Hours passed as she pored over the documents, her heart breaking for the young man Lorenzo had been, thrust into power by his father's machinations. The storm grew fiercer outside, matching her tumultuous thoughts. As evening approached, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. Emergency generators hummed to life, casting the halls in dim, shadowy light. Karina gathered the most damning documents with trembling hands. She had to tell him. He deserved to know the truth. She found Lorenzo in the main hallway, his tall frame outlined against a window as lightning flashed. He turned at her approach, and even in the low light, she could see the question in his eyes. "I found something," she said softly, holding out the papers. "Lorenzo, I'm so sorry." He took the documents, brow furrowed. As he read, his usual mask of control cracked, then shattered completely. His hands began to shake. The papers slipped from his grasp, scattering across the floor as he slid down the wall, his legs giving out beneath him. Karina had never seen anything so heartbreaking as this powerful man breaking apart in front of her. Silent tears tracked down his face as decades of grief and rage finally broke through. His breathing came in harsh, ragged gasps. Without hesitation, she knelt beside him, gathering him into her arms. For a moment, he remained rigid, as if he'd forgotten how to accept comfort. Then, with a shuddering exhale, he collapsed against her, his face pressing into her neck as his body trembled. "I've got you," she whispered, stroking his hair. "I'm here." They stayed like that for what felt like hours, the storm raging outside while Lorenzo finally allowed himself to grieve. Karina held him through it all, murmuring soft words of comfort, her own tears falling as she shared his pain. Eventually, his breathing steadied, though he didn't pull away. If anything, he seemed to sink further into her embrace, as if touch starved for genuine comfort. His hands gripped the back of her sweater like she was an anchor in a storm. When the emergency lights flickered again, Karina reluctantly began to move. They couldn't stay in the hallway all night. But as she tried to stand, Lorenzo's hand shot out, wrapping around her wrist. His grip was gentle but desperate. "Don't go," he whispered hoarsely, his voice raw with emotion. "Not tonight." The vulnerability in those words made her heart clench. This was Lorenzo stripped bare. No masks, no careful control. Just a man who'd carried too much pain alone for too long. His fingers trembled against her skin. "Please," he added, so quietly she almost missed it. Karina settled back beside him, letting him pull her close again. "I'll stay," she promised, her free hand finding his in the darkness. Their fingers interlaced naturally, like they'd been meant to fit together all along. Lightning illuminated the hallway in brief, stark flashes, casting strange shadows on the walls. But here on the floor, wrapped in each other's arms, they'd found something real and honest. The storm could rage all it wanted outside. In this moment, they were each other's shelter. Lorenzo's thumb traced absent patterns on her wrist, where he still held her, as if reassuring himself she was really there. His breathing had evened out, but she could feel his heart racing where their bodies pressed together. The discovery had shaken him to his core, but he wasn't facing it alone anymore. Karina rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the subtle ways his body relaxed into her touch. The fierce protector who'd saved her that first night now trusted her enough to let her see him at his most vulnerable. The significance of that wasn't lost on her. Outside, thunder continued to roll across the mountains, but its sound seemed more distant now, less threatening. In the dim emergency lighting, their shared warmth created a bubble of safety that felt separate from the rest of the world and its harsh realities. Neither of them spoke. Words seemed inadequate in the face of such raw emotion. Instead, they communicated through touch. The way Lorenzo's fingers tightened occasionally around hers, how Karina's free hand continued to stroke soothing patterns on his back, the steady rhythm of their synchronized breathing. The storm showed no signs of letting up, but neither of them moved to leave. Sometimes the only way through pain was to let someone else help carry it. Tonight, that's exactly what they would do. Stay right here, holding each other up, while the truth and the storm raged around them. Sunlight streamed through unfamiliar windows as Karina's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded her mind until she remembered the storm, the documents, Lorenzo's breakdown. She was in his bed, still fully dressed from the night before, her sweater wrinkled from hours of holding him while he grieved. Lorenzo stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the morning light. He turned to look at her, and the rawness in his expression made her breath catch. Guilt and longing warred in his eyes as he watched her, like he was torn between wanting her closer and believing he should keep his distance. "Did you sleep at all?" Karina asked softly, sitting up. "Some." His voice was rough. He looked away, as if ashamed of his vulnerability the night before. They made their way downstairs to the kitchen in silence. Lorenzo made coffee while Karina prepared toast, moving around each other in an intimate dance that felt both natural and terrifying. Neither seemed to know what to call this new thing between them, this trust that had bloomed in the darkness. The quiet breakfast was interrupted by a sharp, piercing alarm. Lorenzo's body tensed instantly, his coffee cup hitting the counter with a crack. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Karina's arm and pulled her behind him. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice deadly calm as men in tactical gear rushed past the windows. They moved swiftly through the house, Lorenzo's grip firm but gentle on her wrist. Shouts and gunfire erupted from the perimeter. Karina's heart hammered against her ribs as Lorenzo guided her toward the library, the most secure room in the wing. The heavy door had barely clicked shut behind them when glass shattered. A masked figure crashed through the window, weapon raised. Lorenzo moved with lethal grace, faster than Karina could process. In 3 precise movements, he disarmed the intruder, broke his arm, and snapped his neck. The crack of bone echoed in the silent room. The masked man crumpled to the floor, lifeless. Blood pooled on the expensive carpet. Karina stood frozen, her back pressed against a bookshelf. She watched Lorenzo check the body with clinical efficiency, his movements controlled and practiced. This was the side of him she'd known existed but hadn't witnessed, the ruthless Don who killed without hesitation. Yet she didn't run. She didn't scream. Because beneath the horror of what she'd just witnessed was the crystal clear understanding that Lorenzo had done it to protect her. The intruder would have killed them both. Lorenzo's men arrived, efficiently removing the body and securing the estate. Only when they were alone again did Lorenzo turn to her, anguish replacing the cold fury in his eyes. "Karina," he started, his voice rough. "I'm sorry you had to see." She crossed the room before he could finish, her hand rising to touch his face. His stubble was rough against her palm, but she felt him lean into her touch like a man starved for gentleness. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Something broke in Lorenzo's expression. His hand tangled in her hair as he pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers for one breathless moment. Then his lips found hers, and the world tilted on its axis. The kiss started slow, almost reverent, as if he was giving her time to pull away. But when she gasped against his mouth, her fingers curling into his shirt, something snapped. The kiss turned hungry, desperate, all-consuming. His arm banded around her waist, pulling her flush against him as his other hand cradled her head. Karina melted into him, answering his passion with her own. She could taste his need, his fear of losing her, his desperate desire to claim and protect. Her back hit the library table, and Lorenzo lifted her onto it without breaking the kiss, pressing between her thighs as she wrapped her legs around him. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Lorenzo's pupils were blown wide, his carefully maintained control in tatters. Karina's lips tingled, her body humming with electricity where they touched. They stared at each other in the sunlit library, the air heavy with the knowledge that everything had irrevocably changed. This wasn't just protection anymore. This wasn't just duty or obligation. This was something far more dangerous, more powerful, and neither of them could deny it any longer. The morning sun filtered through the curtains as Karina woke in her own bed, her lips still tingling from Lorenzo's kisses the night before. They'd parted ways after that heated moment in the library, both needing space to process what had happened between them. A soft scratching sound caught her attention. An envelope slid under her door, pushed by unseen hands. Inside, she found a photograph that made her blood run cold. Lorenzo stood over a crumpled body, his expression merciless. The image was dated 3 years ago, but it was the handwritten message beneath that made her hands shake. "He killed your fiancé. You're next." Heart thundering, Karina rushed to find Lorenzo in his study. "Did you kill Mark?" she demanded, thrusting the photo at him. Lorenzo's face hardened. "No, he was alive when I left that night. Whoever sent this is trying to manipulate you." "How can I believe you?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she backed away from him. "I don't know what's real anymore." She fled down the hallway, bumping into Marco, one of Lorenzo's guards. His concerned expression seemed genuine as he whispered, "I can help you leave. There's a back road the patrols don't watch at dusk." Karina hesitated, torn between her growing feelings for Lorenzo and her fear of the truth. As the sun began to set, desperation won. She followed Marco through the trees, away from the estate. The forest grew darker, and Marco's demeanor changed. His gentle guidance became a rough grip as he revealed his true identity, a Bratva mole sent to capture her. Before Karina could scream, he bound her hands with zip ties and shoved her toward a waiting van. "You should have stayed with your Dawn," he sneered, forcing her inside. Lorenzo burst into Karina's empty room, his controlled facade shattering. The crystal tumbler in his hand exploded against the wall, sending shards flying. "Lock down every gate!" he roared, his voice echoing through the estate's halls. "No one leaves!" His men scrambled as he pulled out his phone, dialing numbers with trembling fingers. Within minutes, Allied crews were mobilizing across the city, ready to tear it apart to find her. In the back of the van, Karina forced herself to stay focused, despite her terror. She studied Marco's neck as he drove, noting the distinctive tattoos visible above his collar. After months of organizing Lorenzo's intelligence files, she recognized the specific pattern. These weren't random designs, but markers of the Petrov faction of the Bratva. The van bumped along dirt roads until they reached a dilapidated hunting cabin. Marco roughly dragged her inside, binding her to a wooden chair with rope. Her wrists burned from the tight knots, but she kept her breathing steady, watching as he stepped outside to make a call on his satellite phone. Through the grimy window, she caught the numbers he punched in. 74289. Across the city, Lorenzo left a trail of destruction. He stormed through known safe houses, breaking bones and extracting information with cold precision. Blood stained his expensive suit, but he didn't stop. He wouldn't stop until he found her. In the cabin, Karina worked patiently at the knots, binding her right hand, carefully loosening them while listening for Marco's footsteps. Finally, her hand slipped free. Her eyes landed on a broken bottle near her feet, its jagged edge glinting in the dim light. Slowly, she reached down, fingers wrapping around the makeshift weapon. She began sawing at the rope around her ankles, determination replacing fear in her eyes. Dawn painted the sky in shades of pink as Karina burst from the cabin, her bare feet pounding against the forest floor. The stolen satellite phone clutched to her chest. She ran blindly through the trees. Fragments of Lorenzo's maps flashed in her mind as she pressed buttons with shaking fingers, gasping coordinates into the radio. Marco's enraged shouts echoed behind her. "I'll kill you myself!" She dove behind a massive boulder, pressing herself against the cold stone. "Please hear me," she whispered, thinking of Lorenzo. Miles away, Lorenzo's face transformed into something savage as the broken transmission reached him. He knew those coordinates. 2 black SUVs roared to life, filled with armed men following their leader's fury. Karina's luck ran out at the ravine's edge. Marco cornered her, but gunfire suddenly exploded through the trees. Lorenzo emerged like vengeance incarnate, engaging Marco in a brutal fight that ended with his hands covered in blood. When Karina collapsed into his arms, sobbing, Lorenzo clutched her close. "Never again," he whispered hoarsely, carrying her to safety while barking orders for medical aid. Sunlight streamed through the windows of Lorenzo's private suite as Karina nestled deeper into plush blankets, her bruises fading, but her spirit strengthening. Lorenzo hadn't left her side for 2 days, his fierce protectiveness softened by gentle touches and worried glances. "Mark's family fed me lies for years," Karina whispered, her voice steady despite the pain. "They made me feel worthless." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "You were never worthless. You found truth in those archives that I couldn't see for decades." "We saved each other," she said softly, reaching for his hand. He gripped her fingers, determination blazing in his eyes. "I'm dismantling it all. The corruption, the violence. Your work organizing those documents gives us everything we need to expose the worst while protecting those loyal to us." Weeks flowed together like watercolors. Karina's fingers flew across keyboards, digitizing evidence while Lorenzo worked tirelessly to transform his empire. At night, when memories turned to nightmares, he held her close, whispering promises of safety until dawn. On a crystal morning, they stood on the balcony overlooking misty valleys. Lorenzo knelt, not in fear or force, but pure devotion. "You're my only light," he breathed, voice raw with emotion. Karina chose him, chose their future, chose love over fear. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.